Here is its opening page on the right, with its first word, as Chris has read out, whacked, a traditional refrain to call the attention of the audience. A transcription is given on the left. The original manuscript is written, or I should say copied, in an 11th century Old English hand, or to be more precise, two hands, as shown here. There is a change just about here, right in the middle of the sentence. We are lucky to have this manuscript today, as it was very nearly destroyed by a fire at Ashburnham House in London, where it was being kept in 1731. You can see by the state of the last page of the poem that it is somewhat damaged, and much work has been done over the years to painstakingly determine and retrieve elements of the text throughout the whole manuscript, which were lost in the conflagrations. For some time, the manuscript was largely forgotten, and when it surfaced again in the 18th and 19th century, it was treated rather dismissively as a fantasy story of wild and fictitious imagining, until, that is, J.R.R. Tolkien changed all that. In his day job, the author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings was also a professor of Anglo-Saxon and English language and literature at Oxford University, and had been teaching Beowulf to his students for 15 years. He had become increasingly irritated by scholars misinterpreting the poem and accusing it of being merely a piece of unworthy, excessive imagination with too many monsters to be believable. In 1936, he wrote a seminal paper to the British Academy in which he positioned the poem as an elegy or an heroic elegiac poem, and one of the most admirable we possess. And this is what he said. Now, I'll come down to just here and I'll read this bit for you. There is not much poetry in the world like this. It has its own individual character and peculiar solemnity. It would still have power had it been written in some time or place unknown and without posterity, if it contained no name that could now be recognised or identified by research. In fact, it is written in a language that after many centuries has still essential kinship with our own. It was made in this land and moves in our northern world beneath our northern sky. And for those who are native to that tongue or land, it must ever call with a profound appeal, until, that is, the dragon comes. And it is the glory of the language which is both the most appealing and the most difficult for us today. Not only the words, which few of us can understand, but also in its form of oration and in the nature of the way it was told, the performance of it, which is significant. The story would have been told by a shope, an appointed storyteller, whose job was not only to keep the collective stories of the king, that's the myths, the legends, and the culture alive, but to do so in a way which would engage the minds of the audience and transport them to another world. It would have been delivered in accordance with the cadence of the oral formulaic tradition of Anglo-Saxon poetry, using the peculiar sound world of Old English, and with its specific stresses on words, alliteration, phrasing, and the use of caesura and other forms of emphases, and the delightful use of kennings or metaphoric symbolism to describe everyday features. It is thought also that it might have been accompanied by occasional music, perhaps plucked by the shope on a lyre, and we shall see this in just a minute. It would have been a performance in the sense that it would have been spoken with gusto and emphasis and appropriate command of dramatic delivery, though it is unlikely that it would have been staged as such, although the shope may have used a dais on which to give his speech above the crowd. For the poem would have been told in the Lord's or the King's Mead Hall, not so far from this, amidst a gathering of the kinfolk, mostly men for important law and decision-making meetings, but including women and possibly children of all ranks and walks of life for communal feasting and celebratory occasions. So we're going to try to give some sense of that atmosphere tonight through a reading of the poem in modern English, though we will hear some Old English first. There have been many translations of the poem over the years. Perhaps the famous ones are by Tolkien himself and Seamus Heaney, and others such as Howard E. Chickering Jr.'s and R.M. Louisa's, and Claver's edition, which has long been the standard version on the left, and Alexander's Penguin Classic edition. My go-to translation has been Michael Swanton's, but a remarkably readable and up-to-date version was produced during COVID by Maria Davana Headley, which is an interesting feminine slant on the story, eminently scholarly and faithful to the story, and I thoroughly recommend it. But we are going to be using two particular versions as the basis of our reading tonight. Dick Ringler's verse translation, produced specifically to aid modern oral delivery, and Michael Morpurgo's simplified prose version, as we have found them very easy on the ear whilst conveying the essentials of the story. But before that, let's take a quick look again at the original language and see how it might have sounded and been performed at the time. So here's the opening page again, so that you can remind yourselves of what it looked like. Notice in particular the start and the word what, as Chris has explained, and several lines down the phrase, that was God cuning. Just here and just there. Sorry. This expresses a key theme of the poem: to do right by one's fellows, to be fair, upright, generous and strong. We're now going to show two short clips of video, spoken and performed in the original Old English by singer and performer Benjamin Bagsby, and accompanied by his lyre, as it may have been back then. The first takes us through the passage just highlighted there, and then the second will be somewhat later in the poem and will show some of the lyre music.
Den jävdagen förkunninget rum ifrån oss. Goda ädlingas ällen främmedon. Oft, skyttskydd, tjädra tvätta, många mig och neurosättla och det. Hej så det ällas. Sedan är det för världsaktionen. I det språk är bara, wet som det vatten, wet med den fart. Och att en Irish-huset den drar över rondra huran så. Gomban julen. That was good, Kuning.
And now for the second clip, which is later in the story. If I can get it to...
God räv, lärde god räv. God räv, lärde skyllingar. Han färbarn parker in med den varor vågor och herrade rassvan högar och trockar och taggar till. För hittat ur så var sonen om kvinn här och skylningens hälske detta. Han frågade spending in Wigan's worth men, that in his winamagus jorna hurdom, och that so you go the wex, Magudrich Mitchell. Himmel borde an, that halvretset hatan borde, Medoan Mitchell, men ju ettan, och det ullobär nävriga flonor, Taron in den älge där de gjorde med äldre slutsin gatsjälle på från folkskär, och det fören gummina. Han smidig och fräng, verkar pannan margen mig, för jag visar mitt vänjer, folk ser fattan, i man frustiga av handen med dörren, där vi två väljer och här är det med. Så him, hört, namn.